And I'll note that silver looks much stronger than gold. Silver remains bullishly postured above both of its key moving averages, specifically the 50 and 200-day moving average. And by most definitions, you could call that an uptrend. So silver has remained in an uptrend, and the big level to watch is $29.92. That was the August 2020 high, followed by $30.35, I believe, which was the little spike we got on the silver squeeze. So really, let's just call it the $30 level. And once we get a clean break above $30, I think silver could really be off to the races. Now, conversely, there's a key support line, and you can draw a trend line dating back to March of 2020, those March lows. And we're currently just maybe $1 or so above that. But if that green trend line were to fail, we could see a little bit more weakness in silver prior to a resumption of the uptrend.
Now I'm hearing prices pretty soon of like, $40 or so. What is your perspective on that? Is that a little too bullish, or is that really a possibility?
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, that's just the nature of silver. It moves really fast and makes really big moves, and often when people least expect it. So I continue to think that even maybe $50 silver is possible in 2021. And I say that because gold broke out to new all-time highs in 2020, and it's very characteristic of silver to follow suit. Just lag a little bit behind. So I think it's possible we see new all-time highs in silver. And, silver, to my knowledge, is the only commodity that's trading below where it was in 1980. And not only just a little bit below, but it's like 50% lower than it was 40 years ago. So $50 silver really isn't that much of a stretch. Now, to predict that in the next few months, I'm not going to go out that far on a limb, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. So I'll leave it there.
Now, maybe a counter argument to that, if you could address this, is that what we saw in 1980 was so much of an anomaly, So on a fundamental level, do you think silver is worth upwards of $50?
I do, yeah, and that's a very valid point. I don't remember the exact data, but silver was only above $40 for just maybe a couple of days back in 1980 when we had that spike. So it's not like you had a lot of opportunity to sell at those levels, and you can make the case that the Hunt brothers cornered the market and that was an anomaly. Well, I think what we're headed for eventually in the fullness of time with silver, I mean, maybe there's no Hunt brothers, but we have Eric Sprott out there, with PSLV. There's a big movement on that. And back then, really the whole world didn't have access to the financial markets like we see now. So I think this is going to be a global phenomenon if and when people lose confidence in the currency and people, seek to own silver. There's just not enough of it. So, I do think north of $50 silver is coming. It's just a matter of time.
I think that's a really interesting point you address, how it's a global phenomenon now. We see how, for example, with Bitcoin, anybody in the world can buy it. And it's the biggest bubble probably in the history of mankind. So do you see, because we're such a globalized world now, that the movement in silver could really be explosive?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you bring up Bitcoin, because I like to make this point. I've been studying Bitcoin for a while, not so much because I'm not for or against Bitcoin. I like to see my friends in the crypto market making a lot of money. I don't personally participate, but I study it because it has so many similarities really to the silver market. There's a finite quantity of Bitcoin, I think like 21 million. Well, there's a finite amount of silver on the planet. And, it's ripe for a speculative mania, just like Bitcoin. And also just to study for exit strategies, I think silver is going to go into a mania eventually. And just watching what's happening in Bitcoin, it's a good thought experiment to put myself in that position and say, would I be selling a little bit here, or would I be holding on? Because I think we're going to have to make those same decisions when silver really gets going.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I talked about Bitcoin being a bubble. I honestly don't know if it's a bubble or not. It seems very hard to actually figure out its intrinsic value, but just kind of making the point that, when we have such a globalized world, anyone can buy, we can just see huge price movements. Definitely. And kind of getting to gold now, your perspective on where gold is. I know a couple weeks ago you were on Palisade Radio saying that there was a key level at 1767, and we broke below that and we closed the week below that. So do you see further weakness, or where do you see that gold is right now?
Yeah, so last Friday, gold lost that key 1767 level. And the reason that was a key level is that was the low dating back to 30 November. And really, that was the low of this 7-month consolidation pattern that we've been in. So we broke below that on a closing basis on the week, and it was also a monthly closing basis, and that happened on large volume, which also adds confirmation. So the technical picture for gold, there's no denying that there's been technical damage inflicted on the chart. However, we are sitting just above a strong confluence of support between 1690 and 1715. And by the way, 1715 was the low last Friday. That's also a Fibonacci support level. So here's my baseline expectation. Of course, I could be wrong, but I think the most likely scenario is that this support level holds around 1690 towards 1715. We probably carve out a new base. It's probably going to take a little bit of time, maybe a couple months, before we start moving up to new highs. But from the big picture perspective, really, I'm not concerned because we know where this is headed. But technically, in the short term, it could take a little bit of time to repair the damage that's been done.
No, that's really interesting because we have been seeing for the last month or two kind of a disconnect between gold and silver. Do you see that continuing? Like we could actually see gold fall as we see silver rise?
Well, that's one possibility. So what you're referring to obviously is the gold to silver ratio, and that reached like an all-time historic anomaly back in March of 2020, like 130 to 1. That's never before been seen. And since March of 2020, silver's outperformed gold by a factor of roughly 2. That gold-silver ratio has come down to about 65 from close to 130. So that's closer to normal, but silver is still undervalued relative to gold. Now, I think that ratio closes by both metals moving up, just silver moving up faster.
And if we look at the fundamentals to own physical gold and silver, can you expand on that? I know there's a lot of technical analysis, right? But at the end of the day, it does seem like gold and silver are undervalued. There's a good case for that. Can you expand on that?
Sure, I could go a couple different directions with that question, but first of all, the importance of owning physical metal stored outside of the banking system. A lot of our members at Silver Chartist are new to this sector, and they want to hop right into the speculative penny stocks. And I'm not against those. There's certainly a place for those in your portfolio, but I always advocate for owning physical metal stored outside of the banking system first. And, right now there's this big PSLV movement, and I am all for that. Let's take those 1,000-ounce bars off the market. But I would caution that for people to not construe that as a substitute for owning physical that you can put your hands on. And I recommend that people start there because I believe there's going to come a time when you want it most, you're going to be the least able to get it. And imagine living in Venezuela right now, owning shares of PSLV aren't going to do much for you, but you would want the physical in your hand. Start with the physical metal, that's your fire insurance. I like to say build your moat before your castle. And then sure, if you just want exposure to the price, then PSLV is a fine trust, or some of the mining stocks as well. We do all three, but I like to start with the physical metal.